I didn't ask to end our marriage. Walk out that door, hearing you say those words. Don't wait.
The antiseptic hospital room was filled with a constant beep, beep, beep that resonated through the air. The light was able to penetrate the blinds, and the soothing rays of sunlight were able to pour across the bed that Lulu Spencer was sleeping in. Her sole remaining sanctuary was stillness, which provided her with a reprieve from existence and a nothingness devoid of dreams. On either side of her life, which was gradually coming to an end, there were individuals from the opposite side, including her friends and relatives, who were all taking turns in their lives, which was still going on as hers was reaching its conclusion. At this moment, Dante Falconeri was seated next to her, and his hand was lightly resting on hers. The strain that was visible on his face was one that he had experienced before: tiredness, hope, and even more exhaustion surrounding the glimmer of hope. While he sat here for hours, he pleaded with her to wake up and to go back to the world that she belonged in. He had done this for a great number of days at this point. Her voice broke, and she said, "Lulu, please," he pleaded quietly. "I am present. This is where I've always been. Remain in our company. I need you. We need you," she said. There was a rumbling in the shadows. Objectivity, subjectivity, and a wizard who was encased in a cocoon of unconsciousness began to undergo a transformation. A glimmer of lucidity, like light that is peeking out from behind the darkness when morning is breaking. The long slumber that Lulu had been in had finally come to an end amidst all of this time. Her children's laughter, her mother's faintly muttered voice, and Dante's muscular arm brushing against her own were some of the fragments of memory that raced around in her head. Dante was unable to continue breathing because of the movement of her fingers, which was not noticeable to the naked eye. "Is that Lulu?" His words were delivered with a light touch of optimism. A nurse who was monitoring the monitors suddenly stopped moving, and her focus went to a hand that had moved. The final word had been said in a squeak that was a few octaves lower than the previous one, and she hastily moved to the bedside. "Just let me check her vitals." Even before she could seize Lulu by the wrist, the sound continued to reverberate, and the movement became more intense. When Lulu opened her eyes, she was met with the sensation of her eyelids fluttering, as if someone were attempting to raise 3,000 pounds of talk. "Hello, my name is Lulu." Getting closer, he leaned forward. "You are not in danger. You are currently at the medical facility." Her lips opened, and it seemed as if a murmur was beginning to escape from within her, and it was barely audible. D. Who is Dante? Discovering a new world to explore. Although the nurse pressed the call button, which resulted in the physicians being called, Dante remained still as he gazed into Lulu's eyes. My name was eventually uttered by him, and he gave a sigh of relief as he did so. "Lulu, you are beginning to awaken. Yes, you are okay." At long last, her eyelids began to move and opened, revealing the fluorescent lights that were present throughout the hospital. All of it was too strange, and her mind was having a hard time processing exactly where she was and how she had arrived at that location. The question where, she started, her voice shaky and raspy. "You're in General Hospital," Dante said politely. "You have been sleeping for a considerable amount of time. Would you be able to recall anything?" The memories of Lulu's last minutes before entering a coma came flooding back to her, including the confrontation with Cyrus Renault, the explosion, and the intensity of the suffering. Her chest tightened up, and she was overcome with a palpable sense of panic. The explosion, the younger children, do they appear to be okay? Dante swiftly assuaged her concerns by saying, they are safe. Despite this, Charlotte and Rocco are doing fine. I want you to know how much they have missed you, Lulu. Every single one of us has. Meeting up with one's family. Within minutes, the hospital was filled with the news that Lulu had regained consciousness. A mixture of amazement and happiness could be seen written all over Laura Collins's face as she rushed in with her eyes wide open. "It's Lulu." As her eyes began to well up with tears, Laura yelled out as she ran all the way to her daughter. In her soft voice, Lulu gathered her strength and said, "Mom." In light of the fact that she was delicate, Laura gave her a hug that was both tender and attentive. While her voice was shaking, she said, "You have returned to us. From the beginning, I had faith that you would." Then, a few moments later, Maxie Jones came sprinting in, her face red from the fact that she had just rushed down the hallway. "Oh my God, Lulu," she cried out as she reached out and clasped her closest companion. At the sight of so many familiar faces, Lulu offered a feeble smile. This was followed by a strong exhalation through her nostrils, and she finished by saying, "Maxie, you were on my mind." When Maxie returned, her eyes were bloodshot and wet, but she was filled with a sense of relief. "Did you forget about me? Always keep in mind that you have been sleeping for months. There is a great deal that has to be brought to your attention. But for the time being, all we are going to do is work on getting you better, having to deal with the consequences." However, the feelings of euphoria that she experienced upon awakening quickly disappeared, and reality began to set in. Her mind began to race with questions that she was aware she would not want to hear the answers to. After a moment of hesitation, she inquired, "How much time has passed where I have been this way?" Following a brief exchange of glances with Dante, Laura responded, "It has been almost a year since we last spoke, my dear." "Is it a year?" Once more, the knowledge came crushing down on Lulu like a freight train. There it was. What happened was that I woke up one morning and thought to myself, "Wait a minute. I missed an entire year of my life." On a somber note, Dante nodded. "Now, however, you are present. That's the only thing that matters." Lulu turned her head to gaze at him, her mind immediately going to the turbulent past that existed between them. "Dante, what about the rest of us? Are we?" Taking a little pause, she deliberated on the appropriate phrasing. Dante drew in a long, deep breath. "Lulu, there is a lot that we need to talk about before we can move on from this situation. It has been a very long time. At this moment, you should focus solely on restoring your strength. In addition, we have the time to figure out everything else. We are starting over." The subsequent few days turned Lulu's room into a pageant of activity. Enough for Charlotte and Rocco to cling to her like barnacles, shrieking with glee at the sight of their mother returning home. Kevin assisted her in overcoming the post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and the time that she had lost. There was also a visit from Sunny and Carly, which is further evidence that in Port Charles, you never leave your house since you have an entire family. On the other hand, as the days progressed into weeks, Lulu started to realize that becoming conscious was only the beginning of the process. Surprisingly, she had a hard time reintegrating herself into a life that had continued on without her presence. During the course of one evening, she admitted to Laura, "Everything seems quite different. What's changed is everyone. I was even able to alter, but I was not awake to see the transformation." Her hand was taken by Laura. She had a face that was soft but solid. Change, on the other hand, is an inevitable aspect of life, Lulu. However, you have always been a fierce individual. You are going to make your way back to your house, and all of us are going to be here to assist you. There is power in resiliency. A newly discovered sense of purpose accompanied Lulu as she made her first steps along the hallway of the hospital, which was positioned between Dante and Laura, with one on either side of her. Despite the fact that her body was weak, her mind was still getting acclimated to being outside, and her spirit was unbroken. "I'm going to be okay," she said to herself more than she heard it from anybody else. Dante remarked with a hushed pride, "You are a fighter, Lulu. You are more than okay. That has always been the case." As Lulu looked around at her family and friends, those who had never stopped believing in her, she came to the realization that he was correct. The path that lay before of her was probably going to be challenging, but at least she would not have to travel it alone herself. It took her a very long time to finally experience hope. This was especially true at Port Charles, that utopian city where hope was usually the only thing that stood between chaos and melancholy. It was sufficient.
Understand this. I just don't understand.
Consequently, grey clouds protruded above Port Charles like angry bruises on the body of the world. These clouds appeared to be tears pouring from the eyes of a divine entity as they expressed their sorrow at the unavoidable death of Samantha McCall. Sam had been a constant presence in the community, and her soul retained a vitality that was almost immortal in the lives of everyone. Therefore, on the spacious grounds of the Port Charles Cemetery, the community came together to say their final goodbyes to a woman who had lived her life according to her own specifications. In the midst of the solemn gathering, family members, friends, and even a few former adversaries who had spoken at the memorial stood together. At the same time, when everyone was sitting beneath the canopy getting ready for the service, you could sense the weight of loss. First, some opening remarks. Samantha Davis's mother, Alexis Davis, was the first person to approach the pension. She was holding a piece of paper that was shaking between her fingers. In spite of the fact that she had practiced her speech thousands of times, it was pointless for her to do so now that her daughter was no longer present. Alexis uttered the words, "Sam was," she was fire and light, while her voice was quivering. She had the ability to take control of a situation that appeared to be complete and utter anarchy. Whether she was standing with Jason, battling for her sons, or pushing for what she believed in, Sam was never the type of person to back down from a disagreement. She had a million lessons on strength for me to learn, even though I never once felt that it was my responsibility to learn in the first place. Alexis paused for a moment to gather herself together as tears began to fall from her eyes. Sam was more than just my female offspring. If I were to lose her, she would be losing a piece of me. However, I am aware that she would prefer that we not remember her with a sense of regret, but rather with gratitude for the time we were able to spend with her. In addition to Molly and Christina, Alexis resigned, and both of them appeared to be in the same state of sadness. Jason's quiet departure from him. Despite the stream of sadness that broke through, Jason Morgan, who stood to the side, did his best to maintain his mask of stoicism. He was unable to do so. He had forged an extraordinary connection with Sam, one that had endured challenges that would have crushed a love that was less robust. Now, while attending her burial, Jason grappled with the reality that she was no longer a part of the world. The podium was not occupied by him in any way. He had never been great with words, and at this moment, they appeared to be more pointless than they had ever been. Instead, he approached the casket and placed a single white rose on top of it, his palms lightly brushing against the gloss of the wood. As he stood there all by himself, there was a silence that seemed to go on forever. Everyone who knew Jason would have understood that his silence conveyed a great deal of information. The realization that he loved Sam because it was ingrained in his very being. The realization that he would never be able to stop loving her. Danny and Scout's memorial service. After that, Sam's children, Danny and Scout, came next. Despite the fact that he was plainly older than his years, Danny, who was now a teenager, grabbed Scout's hand as he stepped up to the microphone. When Mom was, Danny began his explanation by asking, "How do you even explain?" with a little break in his voice. She was not flawless, but she made a concerted effort to act in a manner that was morally sound. She was my girl, and she showed me that no matter how bad things get, you should never give up on the people you care about, and that you should always fight for them. Despite the fact that Scout was too little at the time to really comprehend the significance of the situation, she continued to be devoted to her brother. She gave a slight nod and then climbed onto the microphone after Danny had knelt down to probably say something to her. Scout uttered the words, "I love you, Mommy," while tears were streaming down her face and reverberated throughout the room. "I long for you." The sight of the children, who were so overcome with emotional anguish, caused others who were present to shed fresh tears. A viewpoint from a close friend. Maxie Jones was the second person to speak, and she impressed us with her customary vivacity, which was somewhat attenuated by the seriousness of the occasion. According to Maxie, Sam was one of those guys who could enter your life and drastically alter it in a way that would never be the same again. Not only was she my closest friend, but she was also my accomplice in crime, and the one I turned to when things went wrong. In no uncertain terms, Sam was brave. Nevertheless, what is more important is that she made you feel fearless when you were in her presence. Maxie paused for a moment and looked around the room. However, Gotham, we only had you for such a short period of time. Her passing is evidence that the cosmos is a quirky place. In honor of Sam, let us all make a solemn commitment to live each day with the same level of bravery and love that she bestowed upon us. A town that has come together in their suffering. During the event, a number of people shared their recollections of Sam with one another. The complex but love-filled bond between them was something that Carly Corinthos thought on. When Spinelli was describing Sam, he did so while holding back tears. He referred to Sam as a warrior Valkyrie, referring to Sam's intense loyalty and extraordinary strength. Sonny Corinthos, whose own life had been entwined with Sam's in both a personal and professional one, took the same approach. He only said that Sam was a member of the family, and his voice broke. It was unclear what they had done to deserve the privilege of being in her presence, but she had the capacity to attract and retain people. She will forever be a member of the family. Reflection in the stillness of Elizabeth. While everything was going on in the front of the church, Elizabeth Weber stood right down the back and remained silent as she followed along with everything that was going on. It was the same scenario she had lived during her time with Sam. There was so much history that was colliding, yet at this very moment, all she felt was the loss. Elizabeth was holding a tissue tightly in her hand. As she mumbled to herself, she required additional time. She was deserving of a great deal more. The last-minute farewell. Following the conclusion of the service, a light rain began to fall, giving the impression that the skies were mourning alongside Port Charles. The casket was lowered into the ground, and mourners came up one by one to say their final goodbyes to the deceased. The person who remained the longest was Jason, who placed his hand on the casket for what seemed like an interminable amount of time. However, by the time he ultimately walked away, it had become a mask made of soulless metal. and those who were closest to him were well aware of the kind of anguish that was concealed beneath it. Molly, Alexis, and Christina were all standing together, supporting each other with their arms around each other as they demonstrated their solidarity. Flowers placed on the tomb, according to Danny and Scout, appeared to be so young but sorrowful, leaving behind a legacy of love and power. There was a sense of friendship that persisted even after the onlookers began to leave. Despite the fact that Sam had passed away, a portion of her continued to exist in the lives of those whom she had influenced. A sister, a mother, a friend, and a fighter all rolled into one. There was a legacy of love, a legacy of bravery, and a lifetime of perseverance. And it was a legacy that Port Charles will remember fondly. "I love you, Sam," Jason said as he turned to stare back at the cemetery for the very last time. This was something that should have been said many years ago, constantly. As a result, Samantha McCall was a representation of love and resiliency, demonstrating that even in the midst of suffering, the bonds that we forge are not capable of being broken.
He's trying to get full custody. He's always trying to take her away from me.
I'm still just not.
Ava Jerome was sitting calmly with a glass of red wine at a table in the corner of the bar at the Savoy, which was bustling with bustle from the many people who were there. Due to the fact that her authoritative presence was diminished, his head started to spin like the wine that she was carelessly spinning in front of her. Nicholas, with his 47 levels of complexity, and Spencer, with all the constant drama he provided, had made things difficult for her recently, and she had a tendency to feel a little bit guilty about things she had done in the past regarding her actions. From the opposite side of the room, Lucas Jones appeared to be in the same state of distress. It was only a matter of time before the results of his struggles with family and interpersonal troubles began to present themselves, and he is fatigued from the day that he spent working at General Hospital. He was still suffering from the stinging sore of a breakup with Brad that had touched his heart, and the feeling of not belonging on this planet, much less in a family that revolved around him, caused him to yearn for something. In response to the sight of Ava, Lucas halted for a brief moment. There had always been an uneasy peace between them, despite the fact that they were not quite close in the traditional sense. They were two people with complicated histories and tortured hearts. After noticing her table, Lucas made the decision that he did not want to complete this task by himself. Cautiously, he inquired, "Would it be okay if I joined you?" After a moment of astonishment, Ava looked up and waved her hand in the direction of the seat that was exactly opposite her. "Of course, what's the matter? Did you know that misery adores company?" Refusing to be confused. A soft chuckle could be heard coming from Lucas as he slid onto the chair. "Even if it's not exactly a bad day, it's definitely one of those days. I wouldn't say I'm in the mood for misery, but it's been one of those days," she said. The eyebrow of Ava was elevated. "Which of those days is it?" "Hello, my name is Port Charles, Lucas. Within this region, those days are simply referred to as Tuesdays." When Lucas heard her sarcastic tone, he gave a slight smile. "It's a fair point." A little pause allowed them to immerse themselves in the soothing silence of their beverages while they gazed at the crowd. Finally, Ava made her voice heard. "So, what exactly is it that's getting to you? You did not come over here for the only purpose of having sparkling company, did you?" After he let out a sigh, Lucas ran his fingers over his hair. "There are a couple distinct perspectives that I may have on the matter. It has been a challenging time at work, but the problem goes far deeper than this. I don't know, I feel like I don't belong anywhere at the time, and I don't know what kind of feeling I have. Despite the fact that I have a deep affection for my family, I frequently have the impression that I am the outcast. If we are talking about Brad then, the man gave a head shake. It's not to be. Ava cocked her head, her look changing from one of sternness to one of empathy. Oh, you are aware that you are permitted to miss him, in spite of everything that he had done. This does not mean that you can simply quit liking someone simply because they made you feel good. After being taken aback by her level of comprehension, Lucas turned his gaze to her. Your words give the impression that you are speaking from personal experience. Ava laughed in a sarcastic manner. To put it simply, Lucas, you have no idea. I could spend a whole year in therapy dealing with my romantic life, and that's only the surface level of the issue. Regrets that shared. After only a few minutes had elapsed, they began to talk about their regrets and heartbreaks. Ava revealed her problems with Nicholas, the wish to move on with her life, while maintaining her relationship with Kiki as part of a hybrid experience, and how she was attempting to pick up the pieces of her broken relationship. Lucas, on the other hand, finally spoke up about the loss of Wiley, the breakup with Brad, and the times when he felt so isolated that it was intolerable. Ava spoke after a brief pause, and she continued, You know, for someone like me, regret is long-time companion. It is always there, constantly nagging you in the background. It is always present. You, on the other hand, I don't have to be concerned about you, I thought. A sardonic smile appeared on Lucas's face. To be good does not mean to be perfect. Along the road, I have made a lot of mistakes. One of the things I trust is Brad. The head of Ava was shaken. I see. On the other hand, loving Brad was not the error. That was the case, and it was significant. One of the mistakes that was made was allowing him to determine your worth after the dust had settled. After looking at her, Lucas felt a connection to what she had said, which was, all of your chaos, and yet you are oddly wise. Ava gave a smirk. Do not allow it to break out. In order to maintain a certain image, I must. A flash of convergence in time. After that, the night and the conversation turned to conversations that were more lighthearted. They couldn't help but laugh at the never-ending soap opera that was Port Charles, Carly Spinelli. Nevertheless, beneath the laughter came a deeper comprehension, a mutual acknowledgement of the complexities of life and the choices that were responsible for defining them. Well, you know, Lucas responded after some reflection. I've always considered you to be a bit of a wild card from the beginning. However, I can see that there is a great deal more to you than what other people give you credit for at this point in time. Ava acted as if she was doing a salute with her glass. Oh, I am so grateful. Right now, that seems almost like a compliment coming from someone who is a Jones. He laughed out loud. This was destined to happen. And just so there is no doubt in my mind, I believe that you are doing an excellent job of moving on. Even if it doesn't feel like it, you are not always the same person. Ava's expression became more gentle. It is my pleasure, Lucas. It is possible that you are unaware of the significance of that. Future strategies and plans. After Ava and Lucas parted ways, both of them discovered that they had become lighter. It had been an unanticipated conversation, but what it did was provide them with something that they had no idea they were looking for: perspective. When Lucas moved away, he turned around to look at Ava, who was finishing her drink against the Savoy with a sliver of a smile on her face. After a considerable amount of time had passed, he had the impression that he had established a relationship with another individual. A genuine connection that was founded on honesty and respect. And as Ava watched him leave, she pondered the possibility that the loneliness that had been settling so securely in her bones each night might have finally come to an end after all. And in Lucas, she discovered someone who understood the complex process of striving to improve oneself while also dealing with remorse. The flowering of a friendship. Over the course of the following days, Ava and Lucas began to spend more time working together. A fortuitous meeting that turned out to be an essential component of both of their lives, providing them with a sense of direction and the fortitude to deal with whatever challenges they faced. For Ava, it served as a reminder that despite the fact that her day-to-day life could become quite chaotic, there would always be room for connection. Furthermore, it was evidence for Lucas that the people who are able to extract the most out of you are often the ones that you least anticipate. Their connection became an unobtrusive but crucial representation of the strength of community in a place like Port Charles, where secrets and drama often dominated the day. It also became a reflection of the healing quality that comes from having a shared purpose.